I want to talk to you a little bit about a little known child, a little known son of King Khufu. His name was Hardjedef, and I want to talk about him a little bit. He's a little known child of King Khufu and someone who was kind of famous in ancient Kemetic time that we don't know a whole lot about. So I wanted to spend some time. I've been talking about King Khufu. I've been talking about some things with respect to the Kemetic legacy and Snefru and that whole line and fathers and sons. And Hardjedef is somebody who comes forward as somebody who's important in Kemetic history. And I want to jump into it because he is somebody who leaves behind a set of instructions for his son. And when we think about this type of didactic and wisdom literature, it is something that is common and something that's well known in ancient Kemetic history. But one of the earliest forms of it was a piece of a set of instructions written by King Khufu's son. As we think about King Khufu, he is obviously the person who was credited with the Great Pyramid. So the building of the Great Pyramids, the iconic part of what is ancient Kemet. He was obviously very well known in history and very well known in ancient Kemet. But his son, one of his sons, and he had many sons, he had many wives, and he had over 12 children. So he had a lot of kids. But one of his sons who never got to be king was someone who was kind of deified and looked at as being a wisdom person, a sage. And we're going to talk a little bit about him today because as I think about all the things that went into the pyramids, the whole idea of the concept behind it and what you can get out of it, because a lot of times we'll talk about Khufu and some people will talk about Khufu in not so nice ways. People say that maybe he was a mean guy. People say various things like that. But we never talk about sometimes the lessons we can get out of that life and the lessons that came from his life. So I wanted to kind of share it today. I'm working on this resource that I'll be making available, but it's this resource that just talks about and sums up King Khufu. And I've been trying to sum up some of the importance, some kings from ancient Kemet, so we can think about that and have a chance to kind of dig into their lives beyond just the obvious, right? So we know that he was the builder of the Great Pyramid, and he was somebody who had did a remarkable thing in history, going down with helping to start that whole complex that was the Great Pyramid. But as we mentioned, I wanted to kind of touch on, he was the son of King Snefru. So as him being the son of King Snefru, I want to kind of point this out so you can see this and you really just get a chance to look at this family tree, if you will. So to give you an idea where Hardjedef sets in this whole thing. So we have Snefru, who is the founder of the fourth dynasty, and you have King Snefru there, and he is the father of Khufu. And Khufu has several sons. You know, he has Khafre, who we believe that the Sphinx is made after Khafre, Khufu's son, and Khafre is the builder of the second Great Pyramid, right? So he is the builder of the second Great Pyramid, that second part that's in Giza, that's Khafre. And you end up having Khafre's son, Menkaure, who is also the builder of the third Great Pyramid. So you have father, son, and grandson, and those three pyramids that's shown in ancient Kemet. That's father, son, and grandson. But there's another part of King Khufu's family line, if you will. He had his eldest son. He had another son whose name was Kawab, and Prince Kawab actually died apparently before King Khufu, so he was never able to ascend to the throne. He died before that. But King Khufu also had another son, and his name was Hardjedef. And Hardjedef, sometimes it could be pronounced the Hardjedef Hor, or Hardjedef. We'll try to look at that. But Hardjedef was someone who was well known. He never got to be king, but he was someone who was well known. He was someone who, as a prince of ancient Kemet, where your dad is like building a great pyramid, you become kind of famous. And so, as I just point out, just real quick as we're looking at this, we have Snefru, we have Khufu, and then for a brief period of time, the Hardjedef, who was the third king of the fourth dynasty, was king. And he apparently was Khufu's son-in-law. Just to let you know, he was married to apparently one of Khufu's daughters. So he was Khufu's son-in-law. He was king for a period of time. And there was another person, perhaps named Netka, who was also king after Khafre. So there was an intermediate between Khafre and Menkaure. So this is kind of the line of succession, if you will, in the fourth dynasty for the first part of it. Snefru, Khufu, then you have Hardjedef, you have Khafre, you have Nebka, and you have Menkaure. But, aside from all that, you have princes, you have things going on. And one of Khufu's sons, as we mentioned here, Hardjedef, he is a son of Khufu. He's a prince, right? And he has his own son, and his son's name is Ab-Ibre. So this would be Khufu's grandson, if you will. His son's name is Ab-Ibre. And this whole idea about teaching your child instructions and giving your child instructions that will help them with their lives. This is something that a father gives to a son, a mother gives to a child, an adult gives to children. It's something that was very important in ancient Kemet. And when you think about the teachings of Ptah-hotep, or the instructions of Menkaure, which we've talked about, the instructions of Kajemni, which we've talked about, the earliest form that we know of, the earliest thing, the actual like aspect of this or example of this is probably these instructions of Hardjedef. And he is somebody who lived during the Fourth Dynasty. It's not 100% sure if his writings were written in the Fourth Dynasty or written after him. That sometimes can be difficult to determine when it's passed on for thousands of years and is written, 1,000 years after this person lived. Sometimes it's difficult to determine was it written in his time or written right after his time. But regardless, he is somebody who is talked about in ancient Kemetic literature and ancient Kemetic tales over and over again. He's mentioned, like Snefru was mentioned, Khufu was mentioned, Mentuhotep II is mentioned. Several people are mentioned, a lot of people are mentioned in ancient Kemetic literature, and Hardjedef is one of them. And he being the son of Khufu, and he's mentioned as like a sage. He's mentioned as somebody who is wise, somebody that you should listen to, who gives advice. And so even though some of the instructions that are attributed to him may have been copied, later on and found, by us later on, it still indicates that this particular set of instructions was something that was old, and it might be the earliest form that we found of this wisdom literature that was in ancient Kemet, and it's attributed to Khufu's son Hardjedef. So I want to jump into a little bit, because as we think about that, it becomes a very interesting thing. It becomes, how do you pass on something as a father to a son? You think about a mother to a child, a father to a child. And when we talk about, celebrating Father's Day and Mother's Day, how do you pass on something to your son? And this is the words or the set of instructions that Hardjedef passed on to his son, Abib Ray. And it's very straightforward. He says, cleanse yourself in your own eyes before someone else comes along and cleanses you. Think about this. He's himself as a prince. And he's telling his son what he thinks is the most important thing. So cleanse yourself in your own eyes. And when I think about that, I think, the idea of being pure, the idea of being right, the idea of knowing truth. You got to get to know Ma'at in your own heart. You cannot let somebody else substitute for you an understanding and a connection with God. You cannot let somebody else stand in your way or in your place or in place of your connection and your understanding with God. Somebody can't be that intermediate. No human being can be that. And you have to have that connection with God yourself. And so that whole idea of you can't have anybody stand in the way between you and God. As you think about that, the whole idea to know Ma'at yourself and to cleanse yourself in your own eyes, be pure in your own eyes, right? And hopefully you have a good standard, right? But be pure in your own eyes, because if you're not pure, especially if you're a prince, especially if you belong to a famous family, especially if you're on a pedestal where people see you, if you're not pure, somebody else is going to come along and cleanse you. Right? Somebody else is going to come along and call out that which is wrong if you are not making yourself pure, if you're not clean and holy in your own eyes. And I think that's a wonderful thing to think about as we tell our children, the whole idea of being holy in your own eyes, having your own concept of righteousness and making it your own. It's like, you develop a skill, you're an artist or, a basketball player, whatever. You may have moves, you may have skills that you make your own. That connection with God, that ability to live Ma'at is something that we should make our own. And you should be clean and holy in your own eyes before somebody comes around and corrects you and makes you holy, makes you clean, right? And so he talks about this, and he tells his son, after you've established yourself, after you've begun to be successful, then take a wife. Take a wife and then find a wife who has her own will established. Find a wife who's essentially spiritually secure. Find somebody who is also secure. Don't go, partnering up with someone who is not secure. But this whole idea of instructing your child to take on marriage when they're ready for it, right? There are a lot of people, just through the centuries, just through the years, parents, grandparents, just a lot of people, a lot of generations, a lot of people get into very serious relationships before they're really ready to have it. I think about, having a child and it's like moving into a new house. Imagine if you moved into a new house and the house wasn't ready. It was stuff all over the floor. It was all junky, things were falling apart. You were like, this house is not ready. Yeah. I can't take on this responsibility. We can't live in it because it's not suitable for us, and we just got this house. A lot of people will try to move in with each other, move into a marriage, move into motherhood, move into fatherhood before they're really ready to financially or, from an emotional standpoint, from a stability standpoint, take care of a child. And he's telling his son, before you take a wife, establish yourself. Make sure you have grown wealthy. Make sure you've grown to a point where you have your career established. Where he's a prince, you have yourself established. You are building your home. You are establishing yourself in your career. Then take on the responsibility of manhood in terms of getting a wife and in terms of having a child. Do that when you're ready for it financially. And a lot of times we have a lot of children, a lot of people, right? will take on that awesome responsibility. One of the most important jobs you'll ever have is to be a parent. It's one of the most significant jobs. Even when people talk about, when you die and when you're on your tombstone, you have like your birthday, that dash, and then your death date, that dash represents your life. And I've often thought about it. And when you think about your life and what's important in your life, a lot of times it's not going to be what you do. Sometimes it's going to be what you do. Sometimes it might be your job, right? And it might not even be your job. It might even be anybody from your job at your funeral. But, it may not even be your job, but it's almost certainly going to be your family, right? Especially if you were a parent. If you were a parent or if you were a child of somebody and your parents about you, they're going to be there. That's going to be a significant part of your life. And if you've given birth and helped to bring somebody into the world, that's a significant part of it. It is one of the most important jobs that we do. And in ancient Kemetic literature, the idea of telling your son, telling your child, telling your daughter what they need to do in order to be successful in life was an important part of their literature. It was actually a genre, right? It was actually a part of like a significant part of their literature. You had tales, you had hymns, you had the book of Coming Forth by Day, and you had didactic literature. It was a part of their literature. And that's not something we do a lot today. And I wish and pray that we get back to that, where fathers will tell sons and fathers will tell daughters and mothers will tell sons and mothers will tell daughters and grandparents will be grandparents and grandparent their grandchildren and so forth. That's something that I think is missing. And the whole idea of finding a spouse and then finding a spouse who has their selves together. He's basically telling them, find you a wife who has herself together. Don't find somebody who is waiting for you to do everything for them. I've heard some people in my family talk about, when you sit down and you meet with someone, and you may be thinking about getting married or dating someone, you want to know what they're bringing to the table. And then somebody else in the family will say, well, then what are you bringing to the table? Like both people need to be bringing something to this table. It's not just one person carries everything and that other person is dependent, and that other person might have, abilities that they haven't developed, and they may not be ready to be a mother or may not be ready to be a father. He's telling him right here, thousands of years ago, find you a wife who is sure in her own heart. Find you a wife who is hardy, who is strong, and you will have a family that you need to have. You come in established, you come in making sure you're in the right where you need to be, and you'll have a son. That's what he tells me. He says you'll have a son. And when you have your son, when you have your child, you build your house for your child. You are building your house for your son. You think, he's telling him, don't get caught up in this material things. What you're really establishing, it's kind of like Native American. We are kind of borrowing this from our ancestors or borrowing this from our children. There's a famous quote that I really like that I got to get the exact part of it. But, we're kind of borrowing the earth and lending it to our, getting it from our ancestors and borrowing it from our children. We're holding it for a period of time. He's saying that in this document, he's saying that when you build your house, you're not really building it for yourself. You are building it for your children. That's something you're going to give it. Don't get yourself caught up in this material world, son. And this is a prince talking. This is Hardjedef, a prince talking to his son, saying, don't get caught up in this material things. You are building your house for your son, right? The place that you really want to start building for. When you establish yourself, and I've mentioned this, Kemetic people, when they got established, when they got old enough, they were thinking about their tombs. They were thinking about their death. They were thinking about the afterlife as the place you spend eternity. They completely had a concept that you live after you die and that you can live for eternity. And that's what you should be preparing for. And this is what Hardjedef tells his son. He tells him, the place you should seek to make for yourself, because you're building a physical house for your children. The place you should seek to make for yourself, make it in your graveyard, make it in heaven, make it in the necropolis, make it your tomb, make that the place where you are connected with God, because literally, this is where we're going to be forever. This is where you're going to spend your afterlife. This is where you're going to be forever. And that's what you should be committed to. And he talks about that, that life in and of itself, that life will exalt us. Life lifts us up. You can become grand, right? You can become a big prince. You can be a king. Maybe you become a millionaire, a billionaire, whatever. You do something amazing in your life. It will exalt you in many different ways, whether you're a millionaire, a billionaire or not. It will exalt you, but death will humble you. Death humbles everybody. And so he's saying life exalts us, but death will humble us. And that you should be preparing for your life in the afterlife. You should be preparing for eternity and not for what's here. What's here, you're going to pass on to your children. What you need to be thinking about is the space for your tomb. Prepare your tomb. And this is what Hardjedef tells his son. Prepare your tomb and prepare the space for the priests who will make offerings to you. The whole concept around pyramids, the whole reason why they had pyramids, there were temples associated with these tombs. So The pyramids are tombs, right? And there are temples in this complex where people go and make offerings on behalf of the person whose tomb it is, right? Sometimes that temple would be really attached to a tomb. Sometimes it'll be away from the tomb. Various things happen over the course of 3,000 years, but the idea was the same, that you had a set of priests or your family members who were making offerings for you, remembering you, keeping your soul alive, connecting with you. And Hardjedef is telling his son here that, that priest is going to be more important to you than your offspring. That they're going to be somebody that will help make that connection alive. And I don't necessarily think that it's more important than your offspring, more than I think that he's telling you to put God first. He's telling his son, if you want to be successful in life, and here I am, the son of a king, if you want to be successful in life, put God first. That's all you need to do. So I wanted to talk about that because that's an important thing for a father to be telling to a son, for a parent to be telling to a child, that this is the way you become successful in life. So I wanted to share that. I love that if you have any other questions or thoughts you'd like to put down below, I kind of wanted to share that and to put some shine on, put some light on the son, the little known son of King Khufu, who was considered to be a sage. And that whole idea of putting God first and putting your life in order before you die. So I thank you so much for sharing. I'd like to hear your comments down below. God bless you. Please tell someone about this. Please share this with somebody. And I hope you have a good day. Talk to you soon.